Hello, I'm Yuanzhen. So I did my PhD with TED 2003 to 2009. That was 6 wonderful years. So as many speakers today have commented on, TED has had just really amazing impact in a wide range of fields. So every time I read TED's papers, every single time, I'm like, this makes so much sense. Like I'm just amazed by the prescience and the insight every single time. Just one example out of many, I think Peter also talked about this today, the Laplacian pyramid and image mosaic papers that was written nearly 40 years ago are still very relevant today. So for example, I'm going to be talking about some HDR work later. So now the HDR algorithms that are pretty much on every phone today, the algorithms used there are very much rooted in those two papers. And also, many of TED's students and collaborators that he's influenced have become just world-class experts in their own right in a wide range of fields. I think this is a testament to the fact that TED doesn't just teach the what, more importantly, TED teaches the how. And also TED just sets just such a great example in taking joy in your work, in always thinking deeply but still intuitively about science. And also just in truly not being afraid to think different and not be afraid to start your own quirky niche. So today I will talk about some of my work with TED and also my experience making products, research-driven products, in 3 very different settings. The first setting was in my proverbial garage. It was actually in my attic, first as an indie developer and then as a founder of a little company. And then at a growth startup called Visco, after I sold my little company to Visco. And then at a big company, Google, after I joined Bill's group at Google 3 years ago. So this is some work that I did with TED back in 2008. So lightness illusions can be thought of as a result of the human visual system discounting illumination and estimating reflectance. So we wanted to see if we trained a system to estimate reflectance, can we then explain these illusions or even predict the strengths of the illusions? And it worked. We used a combination of real and synthetic training data created by Marshall Tappan for intrinsic image decomposition and learned to predict reflectance. Bear in mind that this was before the deep learning tsunami, so the features, the filters were designed and not learned, but the mapping was learned. So we used a set of subband features and also nonlinearity to learn a mapping between observed luminance and reflectance. So it did correctly predict the relative strengths of the different variations of the Kafka rings. So for example, in this illusion, the 2 half rings have the same luminance, but appear to be different in the center and the bottom image. And this illusion is stronger in the bottom image. So our model did correctly predict a larger difference in the estimated reflectance in the bottom image. And similarly, in the snake illusions, it predicted stronger difference in lightness in the top image, the one with the transparencies and the junctions. And when we looked at what the model had learned, of course, it did pretty much learn a multidimensional coring function for the denoising, and it did learn pretty much a multidimensional Retinex algorithm for the lightness estimation problem. And you could use a very similar system for material editing. So for example, to make the stuff here look shinier. And earlier in my PhD, I worked on computational photography with TED, where we tried to use computational means to overcome sensor limitations. So for example, this work on dynamic range compression and expansion that we did in 2005. So the dynamic range problem is that oftentimes you see a beautiful scene in front of your eyes, but when you try to capture it on camera, it just turns out completely different from what your eyes see. This is because your eyes have just amazing dynamic range that the display and the cameras don't really have. So what we did here was to do range compression, which is also often known as tone mapping, so that you can display an HDR image on your low dynamic range display. And we also did dynamic range expansion So first you can compress the dynamic range, for example, from 8-bit to 3-bit, and then you can go back to 8-bit with really minimal loss in the image content. And this cute baby, I believe is Sarah, Ted's elder daughter. So we used a subband architecture and a gain control system, similar to what, again, it was very much perceptually inspired, similar to what you have in your visual system to do this. And that's a segue into my first foray in making a product. So in 2009, shortly after I graduated, Apple released the iPhone 3GS with what they called an autofocus camera with adjustable focus and adjustable exposure. So I thought this was like the perfect device for computational photography, where you have this little phone, which is a little pocket computer with pretty good compute and sensors that still had a lot of limitations. And also the good thing about the phone is that it's with you all the time, so you can take pictures with it much more easily. So I started developing apps in my attic. So basically the first app was a HDR app. It basically aligned and fused multiple exposures into, for example, if you have this image, into the top image, the sky looks okay, but the building looks too dark. In the bottom image, the building looks okay, but the sky is washed out. So so you can combine the two into a nice looking image. And this is just another example. So that was an overall by the way, we did use the Laplacian pyramid for this work. So that was an overall exhilarating experience, being able to just sit in your attic and touch users around the world. It was also very exciting to see it climb the chart to the #1 downloaded photography app in Japan and #3 in the US. Unfortunately, it didn't stay there for very long, but still it was pretty exciting when it happened. But of course, there were many setbacks as well as a small developer. So there was nearly a year when the app just kept getting rejected by Apple with no explanation. And also not too long afterwards, I think all the big companies started really investing very heavily in this area, making it very hard for small developers to survive. After that, I started a little startup that aimed to do image search. So the backdrop was that AlexNet had happened. So I thought that image recognition was finally becoming really good enough to be very useful. And I thought that it would be useful to go beyond the nouns, the objects, to be able to describe images more like how humans might describe them, sometimes even with the fairly abstract concepts and descriptions. So when I was doing this startup, everybody, including my parents, asked, how are you going to compete with Google? I didn't really have a good answer, except for that there were real customers and that needed the service and that were willing to pay for the service. And one of the customers ended up acquiring my little company, and I worked there. So this was Visco, a photo platform. So this platform at that time had about 30 million monthly active users, and I had a good time working there. And some of the stuff that we did there, for example, you can search for adventure and get a lot of these user-generated photos, or you can search for things like minimal, or sometimes like more complex queries. And we also used these image representations to do similar images. Whoops, what happened? Oh, the video is not coming through. Anyways. Okay, the video didn't come through. Anyways, it was similar images. Whoops. Okay, and then about 3 years ago, I joined Bill's group at Google, and this move, in a way, feels like returning to my academic roots. We are a group in research, but we very much care about shipping research into products. So many of the things that we work on are still in progress, but there are a few things I'd like to share. One thing is that we used generative models to expand images for Google's advertisers. So this tackles the image retargeting problem. So for example, the original ads images on the left, they have dimensions that don't fit the ad slots. So there's a lot of white space. So basically, we extend the images with natural content so that you can fit the ad slots better and make them look more immersive. And another project is that we automatically add a border in the image to give you a sense of the 2.5D structure of the scene to make it look like the subject is popping out of the frame. So we combined depth estimation and segmentation to do this. And then again, with my colleagues, especially Varun, that's sitting here, and also Daqing, and also others, we've been looking at a problem that's pretty close to my heart, which is shape and material estimation. So we want to do this on images that are in the wild, that are just on the internet. It's a very challenging problem because these images are taken under very different lighting conditions with very different camera parameters. So here's an example result. We are making some good progress, but we would like to make more progress in terms of both the quality and the scale. And why is this problem close to my heart? Because I dabbled on this, worked on this with TED. So for example, we looked at how you can estimate shape from shading and contour, and humans can do this. And also what makes something look translucent. And humans can do this. Humans can judge, can get a good sense of both the shape and the reflectance of something just by looking at one picture. So if humans can do it, we're hoping to be able to make a machine do that too. And when we're looking at the translucency problem, TED made these molds made of different materials so that we can study how they look basically under the same, with the same geometry and under the same lighting. And I believe these are molds of Ted's lips. Yes. Okay, so I'm done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Yuanzhen. Got time for questions. Any questions? Okay.
So when you're doing the image expansion?
So we, oh yes, so the question is, Peter asked us that how do we do the range expansion? It was a long time ago, let me try to recall. I think we thought that we wanted the expansion to be very efficient, although the compression can take multiple iterations. So basically, we had a function for the expansion, and to make it so that the recovered image is very similar to the original image, we did multiple iterations to search basically for a range compressed version that can give you that range, the original image back. Oh, sorry. Oh, the cropping. Oh, the cropping. Sorry. For the cropping, so this was trained on natural images. So you could first crop an image, and you try to predict the uncropped image from the cropped image. So it was trained on a large number of those examples.
Next speaker will be Frodo.